Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to the greatest love. When one door closes in pain, another opens to show us where we truly belong and who we were meant to become. Celesta Brown stood beside the weathered wooden fence of her family ranch, watching the September moon cast long shadows across the Arizona desert in 1883. The cold autumn wind carried the distant howls of coyotes through the sagebrush, and she pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. Something felt wrong tonight, the same unease that had gripped her before the bandits attacked the neighboring farms. Her calloused hands gripped the fence post as she stared into the darkness beyond their property. The cattle were restless in the corral, snorting and shifting nervously, their hooves scraping against the hard-packed earth. Even the horses in the stable seemed agitated, occasionally whinnying and stamping their feet against the wooden stalls. Celesta had grown up on this harsh land, learning to read the subtle signs that most folks missed. The way the wind changed direction before trouble came. How the animals sensed danger long before humans did. Tonight, every instinct she possessed screamed that something terrible was approaching their isolated homestead. The flickering light from their small ranch house windows seemed fragile against the vast emptiness of the desert night. Her stepfather Barnaby should have returned from town hours ago, but his horse remained absent from the stable. This worried her more than she cared to admit, especially with all the recent talk of outlaw gangs moving through the territory. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through the desert silence, and Celesta felt her heart quicken as multiple riders emerged from the darkness. She recognized Barnaby, its distinctive silhouette on his bay mare, but he was not alone. 4 rough-looking men accompanied him, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats and bandanas pulled up around their necks. Celesta crept closer to the barn, pressing herself against the rough wooden planks as the men dismounted near the corral. Their spurs jingled softly as they walked, and she could smell the dust and sweat that clung to their travel-worn clothes. These were not ordinary ranch hands or neighbors calling for help. Her stepfather began speaking in hushed tones with the tallest of the strangers, a man whose leather vest bore the scars of many violent encounters. Celesta strained to hear their conversation, her blood growing cold as fragments of their discussion reached her ears through the night air. "The girl will fetch a good price in Mexico," the stranger was saying, his voice gravelly and harsh. "Santana pays well for young women, especially ones with that particular coloring. Red hair brings premium money south of the border." Barnaby nodded eagerly, his voice taking on a tone Celesta had never heard before. "She has been nothing but trouble since her mother died, always questioning my authority, always causing problems. You take her, and I will make sure nobody comes looking. We have a deal, and my ranch stays untouched during your raids." Terror gripped Celesta as she realized the full horror of her stepfather's plan. Her legs trembled as she quietly backed away from the barn, desperately trying to reach the stable where her faithful mare Sunshine waited. Every step seemed to echo like thunder in her ears, though she moved as silently as possible across the dusty ground. The stable door creaked softly as she slipped inside, and Sunshine nickered quietly in recognition. Celesta quickly threw a saddle blanket over the mare's back, her hands shaking as she tried to work the leather straps. She had to escape before those men discovered her eavesdropping, before they could carry out their terrible plan. But fate was not on her side tonight. Just as she was about to lead Sunshine from her stall, heavy footsteps approached the stable entrance. Barnaby, his bulky frame filled the doorway, blocking out the moonlight, and his face twisted with rage when he saw her preparing to flee. "Going somewhere, you ungrateful little snake," he snarled, his hand reaching for the leather whip that hung from his belt. "I should have known you would be skulking around, listening to conversations that do not concern you." Celesta tried to mount Sunshine quickly, but Barnaby was faster. He grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly to the ground, his grip leaving painful marks on her skin. The whip cracked through the air, and she cried out as it struck across her shoulders, the leather cutting through her thin cotton dress. "You will learn obedience one way or another," Barnaby growled, raising the whip again. "Either you come quietly with these men, or I will tie you to the corral post and leave you there until you beg me to let them take you away." Before Barnaby could strike again, the desert night erupted with terrifying war cries that echoed off the canyon walls. Apache warriors on painted ponies thundered down from the rocky hills surrounding the ranch, their faces streaked with war paint and feathers dancing in their long black hair. The pre-dawn darkness filled with the sound of pounding hooves and battle whoops that chilled the blood. Celesta threw herself behind a water trough as chaos exploded around the ranch buildings. The outlaws who had come to take her scrambled for their weapons, but they were caught completely off guard by the sudden attack. Their horses reared and screamed in terror, some breaking free from their hitching posts to gallop away into the desert. Barnaby dropped his whip and ran toward the house, shouting for his rifle, but he never made it past the front porch. Apache warriors swarmed through the ranch yard like avenging spirits, their war ponies moving with incredible speed and agility between the buildings and corrals. The lead warrior rode a magnificent pinto stallion, his broad chest painted with symbols that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Eagle feathers adorned his long braided hair, and a bone breastplate covered his powerful torso. He carried a war lance decorated with scalps and feathers, and his eyes burned with fierce determination. Celesta watched in frozen terror and fascination as the Apache chief guided his horse with only his knees, leaving both hands free to wield his weapons. This was no random raid but a carefully planned attack, and she realized that her stepfather's dealings with the outlaws had somehow brought this vengeance down upon their isolated homestead. The Apache war chief on the pinto stallion rode straight toward the ranch house where Barnaby was frantically waving his hands in surrender. His face had gone pale as moonlight, and he dropped to his knees on the wooden porch, clearly recognizing that his schemes with the outlaws had been discovered by the desert warriors. The chief dismounted gracefully and approached Barnaby with measured steps, his presence commanding and intimidating without any show of violence. He spoke in accented English, his voice deep and authoritative as he addressed the trembling man before him. "You make deals with men who steal from my people," the warrior said, his eagle feathers catching the moonlight as he shook his head. "You sell innocent girls to slavers. This brings shame to your ancestors and dishonor to this land." Barnaby stammered apologies and excuses, but the Apache chief raised his hand for silence. Instead of harm, he simply pointed toward the desert horizon and spoke one word that carried the weight of absolute command: "Go." The stepfather needed no further encouragement. He stumbled to his feet, ran to his horse, and rode away into the darkness as fast as his mare could carry him. The outlaws had already fled when they saw the Apache warriors approaching, abandoning their evil plans in the face of the desert guardians. Celesta remained hidden behind the water trough, watching as the Apache chief turned his attention to searching the ranch buildings. She realized he was looking for her, probably to ensure her safety after driving away those who would have harmed her. The Apache chief approached the water trough with careful, deliberate steps, his moccasins making barely a whisper against the hard-packed earth. Celesta held her breath, pressing herself against the rough wooden planks, but she knew he had already spotted her hiding place. His keen eyes missed nothing in the desert night. "You are safe now, flame-haired woman," he said softly in English, his voice carrying a gentleness that surprised her. "The bad men have gone away. They will not return to trouble you again." Slowly, Celesta rose from her hiding spot, her legs trembling from fear and relief. In the moonlight, she could see that the Apache chief was younger than she had first thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years. His face was strong and noble, with high cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. He extended his hand toward her in a gesture of peace, and she noticed intricate silver bracelets adorning his wrists. "I am Manito Rainbow Eagle of the Mountain People. We have been watching this place since the moon was new, waiting for the right moment to drive away the evil ones." Celesta found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I am Celesta Brown. Thank you for saving me from those terrible men and from my stepfather. I do not know what would have happened if you had not arrived when you did." The chief studied her face in the pale light, and she saw something like admiration flicker in his expression. "You have courage, Celesta Brown. Most white women would be screaming with fear, but you watch and you think. This shows wisdom beyond your years." As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with soft pink and gold, Manito Rainbow Eagle helped Celesta gather a few precious belongings from the ranch house. Her mother, a silver locket, a worn leather journal, and the woolen blanket her grandmother had woven years ago in Missouri were all she could carry. "My people have a camp in the high mountains where you will be protected," the chief explained as he secured her belongings to his pinto stallion. "The desert can be dangerous for a woman alone, especially with winter approaching. You cannot stay here where the bad men know to find you." Celesta looked back at the only home she had known since childhood, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. The ranch held memories of her beloved mother, but also years of fear under Barnaby's harsh rule. Perhaps this unexpected turn of fate was offering her a chance at a new beginning. As they prepared to leave, a young Apache warrior rode up to them, his face troubled and urgent. He spoke rapidly in his native tongue to Manito, gesturing toward the southern hills. Celesta could not understand the words, but she sensed bad news in the warrior's tone. Manito, his expression darkened as he listened. Then he turned to Celesta with concern in his eyes. "My scout brings word that more of Santana's men are riding this way from Mexico. They have with them a captured member of our tribe, my cousin Strong Bear, who they plan to sell as a slave in the mining camps. We must ride quickly to reach safety before they arrive." The urgency in his voice made Celesta's heart race as she mounted the gentle mare he provided for her journey into the unknown mountains. The small group of Apache warriors rode hard across the desert floor, their horses' hooves throwing up clouds of red dust that sparkled in the morning sunlight. Celesta clung to her mare's mane as they navigated between towering saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings, following ancient trails that only the desert people knew. Behind them, the distant sound of pursuing riders grew steadily louder. Santana's men were gaining ground, their larger horses built for speed rather than the endurance that carried the Apache ponies across the harsh terrain. Manito frequently looked back with concern, calculating distances and time with the practiced eye of a seasoned warrior. "There is a narrow canyon ahead," he called to Celesta over the thunder of hooves. "Once we reach it, we can defend the passage if necessary. My people have used this route for generations when enemies pursued them." As they climbed higher into the foothills, the air grew cooler and pine trees began to replace the desert vegetation. The canyon Manito had mentioned appeared before them like a gateway carved by ancient spirits, its red stone walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. The Apache camp nestled in a hidden valley beyond the canyon, invisible from below and protected by natural barriers. Teepees made from buffalo hide dotted the meadow beside a crystal-clear stream, and smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily into the mountain air. Children and dogs ran out to greet the returning warriors, but their joy turned to curiosity when they saw the red-haired white woman riding among them. An elderly Apache woman with silver braids approached Celesta's horse, her weathered face kind but cautious. She spoke in her native language to Manito, who replied with respectful tones before turning to help Celesta dismount from her weary mare. The elderly woman, whom Manito introduced as Grandmother Singing Dove, studied Celesta with sharp but gentle eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. Despite the language barrier, there was an immediate understanding between the two women that transcended words. Singing Dove nodded approvingly and gestured for Celesta to follow her toward one of the larger teepees. Inside the dwelling, buffalo robes covered the ground and painted shields decorated the walls with symbols Celesta did not recognize but found beautiful. Singing Dove offered her a bowl of warm stew made from venison and wild vegetables, along with corn cakes that tasted better than anything she had eaten in months under Barnaby's meager provisions. As Celesta ate, she noticed a young Apache man sitting in the shadows at the back of the teepee. His face was gaunt and his eyes held a haunted expression that spoke of recent suffering. When he reached for a water gourd, she saw that his wrists bore the raw marks of iron shackles, recently removed. Manito entered the teepee and spoke quietly with the young man in their native tongue. The conversation grew heated, and Celesta heard desperation in the younger man's voice. Finally, Manito turned to her with a troubled expression. "This is my brother Wounded Wolf," he explained. "He escaped from Santana's slavers 3 days ago, but they still hold our cousin Strong Bear. Wounded Wolf wants to return immediately to rescue him, but he is weak from his captivity and not thinking clearly." Celesta saw the conflict in Manito's eyes as he looked between his desperate brother and the responsibilities of leadership that weighed upon his shoulders. The rescued man, his hands shook as he spoke. Whether from weakness or barely controlled rage, she could not tell. As autumn deepened in the mountain valley, Celesta found herself gradually accepted into the daily rhythm of Apache life. Grandmother Singing Dove became her patient teacher, showing her how to tan deer hides until they became soft as silk, how to weave baskets from pine needles and willow branches, and how to gather the sweet hearts of agave plants that grew on the rocky slopes. The Apache women treated her with cautious kindness, curious about this flame-haired white woman who had arrived with their war chief. They giggled softly when she struggled with their language, but helped her learn the words for essential things: water, food, fire, safety, friend. Slowly, very slowly, she began to understand fragments of their conversations. Manito visited her teepee each evening, bringing news from his scouts and teaching her more about Apache customs and beliefs. He explained how his people read the signs in nature, how they honored the spirits of animals they hunted for food, and how every rock and tree in their territory held sacred meaning passed down through countless generations. During these quiet conversations by the firelight, Celesta found herself drawn to his gentle wisdom and the way his eyes reflected both strength and compassion. She had never met a man who listened so carefully to her words or treated her thoughts with such respect. In the white world she had known, women were expected to remain silent and obedient. But their growing closeness was shadowed by the constant worry about Strong Bear, still held captive somewhere in the desert below. Wounded Wolf grew more restless with each passing day, and Celesta could see the pain it caused Manito to watch his brother suffer while feeling powerless to act without endangering the entire tribe. One crisp morning, Celesta discovered Wounded Wolf stumbling near the stream, his eyes glazed and his speech slurred beyond recognition. The sharp smell of whiskey clung to his buckskin clothing, and she realized with horror that he had somehow obtained alcohol despite being in the remote mountain camp. Grandmother Singing Dove appeared beside her, shaking her head sadly as she watched the young warrior struggle to maintain his balance. "Bad water," she said in broken English, one of the few phrases she had learned. "White traders bring poison to steal Apache souls, make strong men weak like babies." Celesta helped support Wounded Wolf as they guided him back to his teepee, where he collapsed onto a buffalo robe and began to weep bitterly. Through his tears and fragmented words, she understood that the whiskey was his attempt to numb the guilt and shame he felt about escaping while Strong Bear remained in captivity. When Manito arrived and saw his brother's condition, his face became a mask of controlled anguish. He explained to Celesta that whiskey had destroyed many Apache warriors, turning proud men into shadows of themselves. The white traders used it as a weapon more devastating than bullets, knowing that addiction would make the desert people dependent and weak. "My brother trades our sacred turquoise stones to smugglers who bring bottles up the mountain trails," Manito said quietly. "He thinks that burning water will make him forget his pain, but it only makes the darkness in his heart grow stronger. I do not know how to heal this sickness that the white world has brought to our people." Celesta felt a deep sadness as she watched this proud family torn apart by forces beyond their control, and she wondered if there was any way she could help bridge the gap between two worlds that seemed destined to destroy each other. Winter's approach brought the need for additional food stores, and Celesta surprised everyone by asking to join the women's hunting party that tracked deer in the lower canyon meadows. Despite initial protests about her safety, Manito agreed to let her accompany the experienced hunters, knowing that she needed to learn these skills to truly survive in Apache territory. The hunting party consisted of 5 Apache women, each carrying traditional bows made from mountain oak and arrows tipped with obsidian points. They moved through the forest with silent grace that Celesta tried desperately to emulate, though her boots seemed to find every fallen branch and crackling leaf on the forest floor. When they spotted a small herd of mule deer grazing near a hidden spring, the lead hunter signaled for everyone to spread out in a careful circle. Celesta positioned herself behind a large boulder, her borrowed bow trembling slightly in her inexperienced hands as she watched the graceful animals through the morning mist. The hunt began well, with 2 deer falling quickly to the expert marksmanship of the Apache women. But as Celesta moved to help with the processing, she stepped carelessly on loose shale that gave way beneath her feet. She tumbled down a steep embankment, crying out in pain as a sharp piece of granite sliced deeply into her left thigh. Blood soaked through her buckskin dress as the women rushed to help her, their faces filled with concern and worry. The wound was serious enough to require immediate attention, and they knew that the scent of blood might attract mountain lions or bears to their location. Working quickly, they bound her leg with strips of soft leather and fashioned a travois from pine branches to carry her back to the safety of the camp, where Grandmother Singing Dove, this healing knowledge would be desperately needed. Grandmother Singing Dove worked through the night to clean and stitch Celesta's wound using sinew thread and a bone needle, while Manito held her hand and whispered words of comfort in both Apache and English. The old woman applied poultices made from willow bark and desert sage, chanting softly in her native tongue as she worked to prevent infection. For 3 days, fever consumed Celesta as her body fought to heal from the deep gash. Manito rarely left her side, bringing cool water from the mountain stream and feeding her broth made from healing herbs that Grandmother Singing Dove prepared. During her delirium, she spoke of her mother and childhood memories, while he listened patiently to every word. On the 4th morning, The fever finally broke, and Celesta awakened to find Manito sleeping in a chair beside her bed of buffalo robes. His strong face looked younger in peaceful sleep, and she realized how deeply she had come to care for this gentle warrior who had saved her from so much suffering. When he stirred and saw her watching him, relief flooded his dark eyes. "You have returned to us, brave woman," he said softly, taking her hand in his calloused palm. "The spirits heard our prayers and decided you still have important work to do in this world." As she recovered over the following weeks, their bond deepened beyond friendship into something that neither had expected but both welcomed. He brought her wildflowers from the mountain meadows and carved small animals from pine wood to amuse her during the long hours of healing. She taught him English words and told him stories of life beyond the desert, while learning more of his language and customs. But their growing love was interrupted when scouts brought urgent news that would change everything for the mountain tribe. The scouts reported that Rafael Santana himself was leading a large band of mercenaries toward the hidden valley, guided by information tortured from captured Apache warriors. Worse still, they had spotted Strong Bear among the prisoners, forced to march in chains alongside Mexican soldiers and American fortune hunters seeking Apache gold. Celesta surprised everyone by volunteering to help plan the defense of their mountain home. Her knowledge of white military tactics, learned from stories her father had told about the Civil War, proved valuable as the Apache warriors prepared for the approaching battle. She suggested ways to use the narrow canyon entrance as a choke point and recommended creating false trails to confuse the enemy. Despite her still healing leg wound, Celesta insisted on taking part in the fighting rather than hiding with the other women and children in the sacred caves above the valley. Manito tried to dissuade her, but she reminded him that this fight would determine whether they could build a future together or be scattered forever across the desert. The confrontation came at dawn, when Santana's men attempted to force their way through the canyon pass. The Apache defenders had positioned themselves among the rocks above the narrow trail, and their arrows found their marks with deadly precision in the gray morning light. Celesta crouched behind a boulder with her borrowed rifle, picking off enemies who tried to flank the main Apache positions. During the fiercest part of the battle, she found herself face to face with Rafael Santana himself, who had recognized her red hair from his original plans to purchase her from Barnaby. His cruel smile faded when he realized this was no helpless captive but a woman fighting to protect her chosen family. Before Santana could raise his pistol, Manito appeared like an avenging spirit and tackled the slave trader, sending both men tumbling across the rocky ground in desperate combat for survival and honor. The battle ended with Santana's defeat when his remaining mercenaries fled into the desert, abandoning their cruel leader to face Apache justice. Strong Bear was freed from his chains, weak but alive, and the mountain people celebrated their victory with songs of thanksgiving that echoed through the canyon walls until sunrise. In the weeks that followed, as winter snow began to dust the high peaks around their valley, the Apache tribe held a sacred ceremony unlike any in their long history. Manito Rainbow Eagle stood before the council fire wearing his finest ceremonial robes, eagle feathers dancing in his braided hair, as he formally asked for Celesta's hand in marriage according to both Apache and Christian traditions. Grandmother Singing Dove presented Celesta with a wedding dress made from the softest doeskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that told the story of their courtship. Turquoise stones from the sacred mountain mines adorned the garment, and eagle feathers blessed by the tribal shaman completed the ensemble that marked her full acceptance into the Apache nation. The marriage ceremony took place at sunset on the first day of the new year, 1884, with the entire tribe gathered around the ceremonial fire. Celesta and Manito exchanged vows in both languages, promising to honor each other and protect their people through whatever challenges the changing times might bring to the American frontier. As they shared the traditional wedding feast under a canopy of desert stars, Wounded Wolf approached his brother with clear eyes for the first time in months. He had finally found the strength to overcome his dependence on whiskey, inspired by the love and courage he had witnessed. Strong Bear, fully recovered from his ordeal, sang ancient Apache songs of celebration that carried their joy across the mountain wilderness where they had found their destiny together.